Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, how are my snipers doing today? I hope you guys are doing fantastic. Listen, today we're going to be mainly talking about the others dominance chart, right? If you guys don't know, this pretty much includes the total market cap, excluding the top 10 dominance in percentage, right? The top 10 coins are not included for this. So this is perfect for people that are buying into altcoins that, like let's say Render, Ondo, AKT, Myro, Turbo, any type of meme coin, anything, right? Pretty much a coin that is outside the top 10. This is our chart. Now, I do believe we will be having one more big pullback for this chart. Historically, we can actually kind of see that every time there's an aggressive pullback, that usually there's a quick recovery to the upside, and that's when we start pumping, right? So the two prime examples are right over here, right? When altcoin season last cycle officially started, right? We had a couple of weeks of, a sideways movement. Then we sold off aggressively for 3 weeks. And the next 3 weeks, we already recovered. And then we continued to push up. Even in recent times, back in, I guess June of 2023, right? When this altcoin chart recovered, it was an aggressive sell-off for a week. So big sell candle. And then we can see we were just recovered very, very quickly. And we continued to push to the upside, creating a reverse head and shoulders, right? So it usually has some type of, at the bare minimum, aggressive sell-off before it starts recovering. And yes, there was a little bit of aggressive sell-off here, but the context was different. We were consolidating for weeks, under this big zone, right? We could see, even if I remove this drawing, go do something like this, right? We can see we were retesting for multiple weeks under this zone, and that is why we continue to go lower and lower. Even when we take out the wicks, for example, right, we can see that we are consistently creating lower and lower highs and lower lows, right? We have these lows that are, relatively the same, but then the lower highs are getting lower and lower, right? Boom, and then the lower low. And now it is most likely that we will continue to kind of just, sell off. Yes, we are kind of stagnant. Yes, we are kind of sideways, but, historically, there's never been a nice recovery until we have some kind of manipulation. So, and you know what? This is something I've been looking at for months now, right? This is something I've been looking at for months is, going back into this monthly institutional candle. Yes, technically we did tap off of it, but the reality is that the most likely area where we will look to bounce off of is going to be somewhere around 6.5% to 7% before we have a big bounce up, okay? And, I'm not worried. This just pretty much screams final buying opportunity, final time to get into the markets. And you know what? That means once we do have this manipulation, we will recover quickly. And altcoin season is going to be much closer around the corner because, ladies and gentlemen, that is just what happens when this goes down here, right, into this green box, and we see some type of nice fast retracement to the upside. That is going to be the indication that, hey, altcoin season is practically around the corner and it is starting. And another chart we can look at is something like Bitcoin dominance, right? We know that Bitcoin dominance is on the rise and will continue to rise, most likely upwards of 70, 71%, right? Most likely into this zone. Yes, there's even a decent chance that we might even take out this 73% zone, 65% zone, right? Because historically, last time when there was some type of rallies and sideways movement, we took out the last relevant high, right? We swept it and then we crashed right below. So something similar could play out. We could either just go into this zone over here, or we will tap back up to the 73.65 and then have a aggressive sell-off, consolidation, and then a bigger continuation sell-off like we have had historically. So, this is most likely when the chart will continue to go down, right? Bitcoin dominance going up means this chart will most likely continue to go down just for a little bit. Remember, just because the dominance can go up another 5%, that doesn't mean this chart will drop 5%, okay? It just means Bitcoin is going to be the priority, right? Most of the money is still going to be shifting towards Bitcoin. altcoins could bleed out a little bit, get a little bit of a correction before they officially start becoming to the spotlight. We have to remember that this all makes sense because even something like Bitcoin itself, right? Bitcoin, I expect Bitcoin to retrace back down to 90K for a retest. That is what I want to see the most, is some type of retest off of this big support zone. Okay. And for me, the reason why I say even up like down to 90K is because if we take away the support zone, the last relevant daily candle we have is $91,734. So, it could always go a couple $100 more, $1,000 below that. So, 90, 91K is where I expect things to kind of get swept before they come back up, right? So I'm not saying this is going to be the literal, the exact way, Bitcoin's going to go, but overall, I expect to do something like this, aggressive pullback, retest probably, and then continue pushing up higher. That is what I overall expect. So if we do see, some type of correction of even, let's say 6%, right? We could also see Bitcoin dominance going up. That would be also the perfect time for our beautiful beloved chart to continue going lower down to, the 7%, maybe 6.5% zone before we get a recovery. And even just for many, many coins, something like, Caspa having a correction, right? It's normal coins to have a final correction before they pump. Caspa to drop a little bit, something like Render. I have a Render zone marked up where, it can retrace perfectly back to 350 before we, never see this price again, maybe until bear season, right? So a lot of stars are lining up. A lot of things are lining up for, not just Bitcoin, not just Bitcoin dominance, not just, the others chart, but for many individual altcoins, there are so many zones and order blocks and the support demand zones that I'm looking at to have at least one final type of pullback before we kind of don't see, until bear season practically, right? That is ultimately what I'm trying to say. So very, very exciting times. I'm looking forward to, what's ahead of, the next few months. I really, really do believe that, everything is going to be looking fine. Even if you go to something like the 3-month candle, right? For me, this is going to be the last 3-month candle where we kind of go back down. This is probably going to end up more like a doji candle, a little bit of rejection, where I expect this coin, or sorry, not this coin, I expect this to come back down, during May. In June, it could have a recovery. And then once July, August, and September around the corner, that is when we're going to start really, really recovering, okay? Because the reality is, right, we have a lot of imbalance up until 10%. And then after that, it is a little bit more choppy and a little bit slower. But historically, price action doesn't kind of care, right? Once it has that final dip, it usually just has a big pump. So if we have something a similar pump up to, I guess, 13% again, then the next, couple of weeks after that are also going to be nice pumps. And where we can expect altcoin season to kind of top out is potentially at the 16.5% zone because of this institutional candle, or we might just sweep, right? We might just sweep, consolidate, maybe go up a little higher before we crash right above this. Even if, ladies and gentlemen, hypothetically, we only went up a certain amount, the best tool I could use right now is the Fibonacci. We could go upwards of almost 30%. But the thing is, ladies and gentlemen, that might come with a second rally, not necessarily the first. Now, I'm not saying there's going to be 2 rallies, but there's always, a chance now because of last altcoin season. So, that's a very, very good zone. Even if we take something like from the last cycle to take the last relevant bottoms, we can see we actually, the first time around, we topped out exactly the 1.6, right? Exactly the 1.6. So we swept these highs over here. We swept these highs over here. And then we continued to go up for the extra month, month and a half. And then we crashed back down before then we had a second altcoin rally. And then before bear season officially, happened, right? So very, very exciting times, very, very exciting times. I'm super, super optimistic and excited for the next few months. I'd say upwards of half a year maximum is when I expect, for the peaks to be happening. Probably by half a year is when, the altcoin season will probably be ending. I really do believe the late summer, early fall is most likely when we will, be peaking. But yeah, that is it, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you guys did enjoy, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Goodbye.